Hey everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio's first Monday. Our first Monday show is always about military history, and that means we have military Mike Guardia with us. Mike is an amazing author. He has written so many books. How many books now, Mike?
21.
Oh my
Wow.
gosh. Oh my gosh, we should throw a party. That's it. You got to
Wow.
21.
Yeah.
Dude, seriously.
Man.
Award-winning author, military historian, U.S. Army
Mm,
veteran, 21 books. Always want to give a shout
that's
out
a
to
lot.
Hal Moore, A Soldier Once and Always. And, we always talk about that book. That's pretty much what really got you started, right? It was that book that kind of led the platform to 21.
Well, yeah, it was one of the first books that I wrote. And yeah, I mean, even before I finished that project on Hal Moore, I knew that I knew that I had a lot of stories in me that I wanted to tell. And I knew that I had just caught the bug really bad. And I wanted to just keep on writing for as long as the stories kept coming to me.
Right on. And the
Wow.
latest one is all about Paul F. Gorman, four-star general. It's called Danger
Right.
Forward. So we just did that interview, and everyone, you can
Yeah.
check that up on blendradioandtv.com. And
Mm.
just go to mikeguardia.com, right? Best place.
Yeah.
Go there. And also on Amazon is a good place to go and get Mike's books. But today, Mike, we're going to touch on two books that we've talked about before, Foxbat Tales and
Okay.
also American
Mhm.
Armor in the Pacific. So, being January, this is our January show. You wanted to kind of
Right.
touch on what had happened in December, go
Correct.
from
Mhm.
World War II to Afghanistan. Like we're going
Yeah.
to do a big jump, right?
Right.
Um,
Pretty wide
from
stretch.
from
Yeah.
tanks to MiG 25s. Am I right?
Uh-huh. Correct.
Okay.
Mm.
All right. So, and actually, what's interesting today is actually we're recording on the date of the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, right? Today.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And it's when you think about what happened there, Nancy says it's a giant sneak attack, what happened.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes.
But
Very tragic.
yeah, and I still wonder because I've read so many historic novels,
Mhm.
and there are indications that some people knew but didn't tell, and I'm not sure, but I don't know. Just somebody must have known something at some point, don't you think?
Well, I think a lot of us had an inkling that we were going to fight the Japanese eventually, but we
Hmm.
didn't
Yeah.
really expect the sneak attack to happen when it did, and we didn't expect it to happen to the magnitude that it did.
Mm.
There were a lot of rumblings within the intelligence community and within the immediate community of the Pacific Fleet that were preparing for a potential showdown against Japan. But there were a few overriding bits of conventional wisdom that kept people thinking that, if Japan does attack, they're not going to last very long.
Hmm.
And that if they are going to attack, they're going to probably attack the Philippines before they would ever even dream of attacking the Pacific Fleet at Pearl
Right.
Harbor.
Yeah.
One of the things that I touched on when I wrote American Armor in the Pacific was, trying to give the reader a setup into how the Pacific War against Japan started. And
Mhm.
one of the prominent admirals at the time was having a conversation with his opposing number in Japan before the war even started. And he
Mhm.
told him words to the effect of, look, if you guys ever were to go to war against us, you might have your initial successes, but you don't have the manpower and you don't have the
Mhm.
wherewithal to sustain a protracted naval war against the United States. So, let's avoid the problem before it even gets off the ground. Hey, folks, don't
Yeah.
do anything dumb. Don't even think about going to war against us because, it's not
Mhm.
going to end well for you. And that really factored into a lot of the Japanese's operational calculus because they were telling
Mm.
themselves, well, look, if we look at our comparative strength on paper, yeah, they're 99% right that if we do start a war in the Pacific against the US Navy, it's probably not going to end well for us. So, what do we
Mm.
have to do in order to make sure that the Navy can't fight back if we do start a war against them? Well, the only real option we have at this point is to try and take out the entire Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. Because if we can get the battleships, and we can get the cruisers, and we can get the destroyers, and particularly the aircraft carriers, take out everything in one fell swoop at Pearl Harbor, then it will cripple the US Navy's ability to conduct war throughout the Pacific, and they'll sue for peace on our terms. So we're going to put all of our eggs in one basket. And if we succeed in the attack on Pearl Harbor, that's the only way that we're going to pull this off. So, the prevailing wisdom then from the Japanese side of the house was, okay, if we're going to do it, we have to make the first strike, and we have to do it intensely enough to where they can't fight back. And the Americans were telling themselves, well, they don't have the capacity to steam a naval task force all the way from Tokyo to Pearl Harbor. And they certainly don't have the technical know-how. They don't have the same warfighting capabilities that we do in order to pull that off. So when you take those two competing ideas and you put them within the same environment, you have the perfect storm for what is going to be a surprise attack that on our side we never saw coming, and on their side they're saying, okay, if we're going to do this, we have to do it right in one try, because if we miss, and if we don't accomplish 100% of our objectives in the first strike, that's it. It's only a matter of time before our days are numbered. And I think the tinge of defeat was felt in the immediate aftermath of the Pearl Harbor attack, because Admiral Yamamoto went on record to say, okay, we didn't get the carriers, guys. That was a huge mistake. Okay. Unfortunately, the carrier groups, they were out at sea, they were doing their own maneuvers. So we got the battleships and we got the cruisers, but by God, we didn't get the aircraft carriers. That's really going to spell trouble for us. And he also said, I feel that all we have done is awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve.
They poked the monster.
They did. And he said, look, he said at worst, we got 6 months, at best, probably 2 years. And that assumption really bore out correctly, because if you fast forward the clock to the end of 1943 and the beginning of 1944, I mean, the end was clearly in sight for the Empire of Japan by that point. And
so I need to back up. I need to back up a little bit, because I wasn't there, and I got to get my dates right. So at that time, so was it Pearl Harbor that? And sorry, everybody, I know people are going to go, oh, that's a stupid question. It's okay. I'm all fine with that. So was that what spurred on the whole internment camps, when everybody, because I know that we've done interviews, and I'm just trying to get my head straight,
right.
Where, the whole coastline of California and even the Central Valley. I mean, we've been on farmers' properties, and they have watchtowers in the middle of orange groves in the Central Valley. In the Central Valley, and obviously, got Manzanar and everything back then. So was it after Pearl Harbor that sprung up, or was it before Pearl Harbor? So that's what started it, was that event. Because the way you just explained it to me was, and to our audience obviously too, just totally hit home of understanding a little bit better about, well, you're a good teacher, man, of how it all happened. No, because I mean, it's interesting how they did it. And just a few days ago, and everyone, sorry, we're recording this in December for January, but it was the anniversary of the Valor of the Pacific National Memorial and Monument that we have, that goes into Alaska, Japan, and different sites across the country. And I put up a photo from one of our travel writers, Debbie Stone, who went to Oahu, and she went to the memorial in Pearl Harbor. And I put up a photo on Instagram about it. And she has like a photo looking down at Battleship Row. And I was just looking at this, knowing we were going to do this interview. And I was like, oh my God, I can totally see how the harbor was set up with all these ships in there. I mean, like battleships. I mean, like it really hit home to me how they could target that. I mean, have you been there? Because I know you've written a book on Hawaii, a Christmas book on Hawaii.
Not yet.
Okay. I'll have to send you that photo.
Why do you know why we were clustered all around Pearl Harbor? Was there a reason for that?
Right. So the reason for that was they wanted to bunch our planes close together to make them easier to protect on the ground. Because the prevailing wisdom was is that if there is going to be a threat in Hawaii, it's going to come from spies and saboteurs on the ground. They were telling themselves,
Oh,
okay, distance here is really going to be our ally. It's distance here that
wow.
makes us safe from any long-range seaborne attack. And Pearl Harbor itself is too shallow for a traditional torpedo attack. Um, so
Hmm.
those two
Wow.
ideas together precipitated all of the planes at places like Hickam and Wheeler to be bunched together, and to say, okay, well, if we have a sentry who's on a roving guard, he'll be able to scare off any spies or saboteurs, because the last thing we expect is an attack from the third dimension, because the Japanese can't fly that far. And even if they could, well, I mean, they want to drop a torpedo in Pearl Harbor, it's too shallow. It's not going to float on its own. But the Japanese, clever as they were, got around that by attaching wooden fins to the back of their torpedoes, which made them more buoyant and able to sail through the water at
Oh,
shallower depths.
Wow. Wow. This
okay.
is interesting
Wow.
too.
Hmm.
Just even going through all
Wow.
your stories with like Paul Gorman, Hal Moore,
Mhm.
Hmm.
we've all these stories. It seems to me that a lot of the generals that, really changed things up
Right.
didn't have this idea of underestimating the enemy. It seems like Paul Gorman, Hal Moore, they looked at the enemy and went, we need to be double down and
Right.
expect
Hmm.
the worst. Whereas when you're talking about Pearl Harbor, we underestimated the enemy.
Correct.
And it seems
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
that happens a bit, and that's a good,
I,
but that's a
I-
good lesson for all of us in business,
yeah.
and don't
Mhm.
underestimate, because whenever you sleep, someone's going to get you. That's how criminals work,
No,
man.
but I
they,
don't. I
they
don't
know how to
even
steal
think of.
cars. They do it every day. you know
I don't know that they actually back then took the Japanese really seriously. I mean, they knew they're a threat, but I think that they didn't take them as seriously as they took the Germans or
Right.
other countries that involved. I don't think they. I think they were all focused on the Nazis and
Mhm.
not on the rest of it. Maybe. What do you think?
Right. So, the prevailing wisdom at the time was that if a threat was going to materialize, it was going to come from Nazi Germany long before it
Mhm.
ever came from the Empire of Japan. Now,
Yeah.
what I think influenced that was the fact that we took a look at what was happening in Europe, and we saw how quickly and how effectively the Blitzkrieg was executed. And
Yeah.
we said to ourselves, okay, wow, he buried
Yeah.
Europe within
Big time.
a matter of months. And,
Hmm.
and if not for the bravery of the RAF, he probably would have buried Britain as well. And
Hmm.
then we took a look at what was happening in the Pacific, and we say, okay, well, the Japanese and the Chinese have been going at it for as long as those two kingdoms have existed. Wars between a lot of the Asiatic states have been a recurring theme throughout history. So there's nothing really new there. And we
Mm.
certainly knew what the Japanese were capable of. We knew that they were fierce fighters. We knew about the atrocities that they had committed on mainland China,
Hmm.
particularly the brutal occupation of Manchuria.
Mm.
Mm.
But we said, okay, well, when we take a look at the two armies' comparative capabilities, there's little question in our mind that the Germans have a much more technologically superior force, and they
Right.
also have stronger tactical bearings than
Mm.
what the Japanese have demonstrated to us. We take all these data points in from the battles that they've not only fought against the Chinese, but the battles that they fought against the Soviets.
Mm.
So yeah, they are a decently equipped enemy, and we know
Mm.
that they have a fighting spirit. But when when you put these two opposing forces together, we were telling ourselves, there's very little likelihood, as far as we can see, that they can defeat us in a contest of open fire. Now, in the early months of World War II, we found out that that assumption really didn't hold true, and that we had to double down on how we were approaching this conflict in order to achieve victory. But victory was ultimately ours, and it was a hard-fought and very well-earned victory, I think.
And there's also the other thing, like the kamikazes, like the do or die kind of attitude, which I think is
that's
different.
But now we look at but now we have suicide bombers. What's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a different take from the Western culture. That is kind of weighs in heavier than maybe we thought it would.
Right.
Did we know, like, that the kamikazes would instead of, okay, I'm gonna go shoot you over here, bomb you over there, but I'm also gonna land myself in this plane safely, or am I just gonna fly my plane right into a target?
Right.
There's two different mindsets, and I always wonder about that. Like, okay, so I don't, it's kind of hard to put yourself in the mind of a kamikaze pilot.
Correct. Yeah, and that was really one of the things that took us by surprise. It was something that we hadn't really counted on, but we found out very quickly that, at least at the time, the Japanese did not have the same respect for human life that we did. Granted, war is never going to be something that's civil. It's always going to be something that's tragic, and it's always going to involve a great deal in the loss of human life. But they really didn't have the same outlook on human life that we had. For them, it was completely acceptable to give planes only enough fuel to make it to the target, but not come back. And it was expected that, once you get to a low level of fuel, you're going to ram your plane into the nearest American target that you can find. And, you see this attitude reflected in a lot of the dogfights that our American pilots have recounted. As a matter of fact, I'll give you one story by way of example. In an upcoming book that I'm doing, The Combat Diaries, I talk about a particular Navy pilot who flew at Midway. He was a Dauntless dive bomber pilot, and he said one of the things that he really couldn't shake was the fact that even after an American plane had been downed and the pilot had bailed out and his parachute and canopy was floating down to the surface of the sea, that a lot of the Japanese Zeros would swoop in and they would vector onto the pilot as his parachute was descending, and they would shoot their guns at him. Because he said to them, it wasn't simply about trying to down an American plane. They wanted to see American airmen bleed, and they wanted to see them suffer.
Wow.
To them, it was a deeply deeply personal affair, and one that they really felt had to end in bloodshed. That if they let a downed aviator escape alive, that they were somehow dishonoring the cause of the war.
Wow.
And to make matters worse, I think an even more heartbreaking story comes from one of the veterans who told me about what the Japanese civilians were doing on islands like Saipan and everywhere else that you had Japanese settlers throughout the Pacific. They said that when they knew that the American task force was coming into the shores, a lot of them committed suicide because they were afraid of what the Americans might do to them. But you take it to an unhealthy extreme when you not only commit suicide, but you're also proactively killing your wife and your children because you don't want them to encounter the Americans. And, there was one story that I heard about a pregnant woman, a pregnant woman who was only, I swear she was only minutes away from giving birth, threw herself off a cliff and drowned herself and her unborn child just because she was afraid that the Americans would do to them what the Japanese had done to everyone else that they had conquered.
Isn't that weird? Like, isn't that how we are as human beings, though? The
Yeah.
the more we are like,
It's
oh, so and
crazy.
so, the worst
Mhm.
thing that we'll think about
Mm.
people goes about like,
Right.
what have you done? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we have that
Exactly.
weird mirror, don't we?
Right.
Well,
And that's really
eh,
sad because then it's also part of
mm,
it. That's weird. It's another, it's like a form of brainwashing.
it
I
is
don't
a
want to
it's a
say
different
that, but you know what I mean?
it's totally a different way of thinking that we
Right.
have a problem relating to. The other
Mhm.
thing I wondered about Japan joining up with the Germans, I keep thinking in the back of my mind, I always thought, well, okay, let's just say the other side won. How long would it be before the Germans took the Japanese out? Because
Right.
in a way, that's going to, with Hitler's mentality,
Yeah.
that
I think he
he
wanted that.
wanted to, oh yeah, he wanted to rule the world. So he may use the Japanese and others to help him
Mhm.
here, but wouldn't he have turned on them at some point?
Oh, I'm
I
certain of it.
really, yeah, that's what I think. And I don't
Uh,
understand why they didn't see that coming.
it's it's.
You know, wouldn't
I
they,
was.
did they not even consider it? Like, or maybe they thought they could take him out too.
Well, I I gotta say the alliance between Germany and Japan, it was largely a marriage of convenience. You
Mm,
had both sides of that alliance who were convinced that they were God's gift to humanity and that they were an invincible race of people and that no one
mm,
could ever challenge
Hmm.
the, let's say, no one could ever challenge the superiority that they had, that it was
Wow.
written in the stars and that it was written in the universe that
wow.
they and only they
Mm,
were the best people on the planet, and that eventually things would go
mm,
in their favor. So whether the Japanese were thinking they would eventually overtake the whites, or whether it was
mm,
Germany thinking that they would spread the gospel of all things Aryan to the
mhm,
four corners of the earth. They each thought that they were the biggest, baddest kids on the block, and that their way was the only way to enlightenment. And I think back to a lot of the early Japanese propaganda
mm,
that was hot and heavy throughout the war. And one of the things that they were telling their own people, no less, so one of the things the Japanese were telling their own people is that we have to defend ourselves against the white imperialist dogs. They said
but
we have to keep Asia for the Asiatics. That was another one of their mottos. And they also
mm,
said we have to defend ourselves against what they called the A, B, C, D encirclement. American, we also have British, Chinese, and Dutch. ABCD encirclement. And when we defend ourselves from the ABCD encirclement, we will show the world that, the Japanese are the one true master race of the planet.
Wow. So what?
so the Chinese, wait a
Where
minute,
does
the Chinese
so?
aren't Asian?
Yeah, no, because that's a whole other thing. Because yeah, you
Right.
know what I mean. So it's,
I
what
mean,
about in the middle of all of this? The Soviets. Like this is, to me, I look at the way Russia has been as well. That they also feel that there's. I mean, isn't that why wars happen? Everyone feels they're supreme.
Well,
And
well,
imperialism too.
mm,
That word, I find
well,
it
there's
interesting
defense. You have
that,
to forget, you don't forget, you have
yeah,
to defend.
defense, sure,
mhm,
Yes.
of
Yeah.
course, but the Soviets, to me, like that kind of goes with them too in a way. And then what about Italy, like Mussolini? What sparked
right,
him off? Like
Yeah.
here it is, and you think about how close and Hitler and Mussolini were like right
yeah,
around that same time frame. Like
right.
what the heck was going on? Like, was everybody fighting over who had the biggest, baddest cigar or what? Like, I'm
Yeah,
serious. Like,
Okay.
yeah,
well, come on,
yeah.
Well,
really?
Well,
I just, it would never have ended if
right.
the Americans had lost. World
Mhm.
War II would still be going on, because then the people like the Germans and the Japanese and people who joined that side would start fighting each other. It would still be going on.
I just find Russia being out there fascinating, so close to
Mhm.
Japan.
Yeah.
You know,
Whole
that's
Oh, yeah.
thing's weird.
yeah. Sorry, I want to go from. So you've got World War II to Afghanistan. So there's some
Mhm.
Yeah.
similarities in a way.
Right.
You know, you're talking about, And I want to go back to tanks too, but
Okay.
let's hop. And
Sure.
that was Nancy's initial thing, was tank hopping on the islands, right? That was her big thing. And
Right.
I want to know about that too. But one thing you said was about cultures, these cultures being completely different to what Americans knew,
Mm,
different to what the
mhm.
British knew, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So Afghanistan, isn't that the same thing when we're going into the Middle East? These
Right.
cultures are night and day different than what we understand. Isn't
Mhm.
that part of the problem of winning and also trying to rebuild?
Right. And that is really what makes it so hard. And that, I think, is where the war effort kind of went off base when
Mm,
we were in Afghanistan, because I think I think in hindsight the objective should have always been to destroy the Taliban, also destroy Al Qaeda, and more to the
mm,
point, kill or capture Osama bin Laden. I
right.
think where we went wrong was thinking that if we engaged in nation building, that it would be a viable enterprise, particularly in a culture, in a part of the world that has no tradition of democracy to speak of. And
Yeah.
where the culture and where all of the cultural foundations are so incompatible with what we perceive to be representative democracy. I just think that it was a doomed enterprise from the beginning.
Wow, from the very
No,
beginning.
Yeah.
Wow.
that's really interesting. Me having lived in different parts of Africa in the bush and being in contact with different tribes and their traditions, and seeing how different they live. Okay,
Mhm.
but more especially what they believe and um, how they think. You you know, you can't, unless you really go in deep and spend a lot of time, and I'm talking years, living within different cultures, you really don't know how they think. You
Mhm.
can guess, but you always think they're going to think the way you do. And it, it isn't true. They really don't think the same. And there's no wrong or right about it. It's
Right.
just different.
Right.
So
And it's
when we
according to
lived
their
in
land too.
yeah, and you know, so the one thing, the biggest lesson I learned in living in Kenya in the bush was even tribes next to each other who were fighting each other. I looked at them like, well, why are you guys fighting? You're the same, and they're like, no, 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 we're not the same,
Mhm.
and they think totally different, and
Right.
they all thought totally different than I would think as an American, and they talk totally different than the British who occupied that country for a while and colonized it. So everybody thinking totally different. And it's not really surprising to me that people fight because they're so sure that their way is the right way. You know, there's
Right.
not that space for, okay, you think this, I think that. So go ahead, think your way, I'll think my way,
That's
but let's just not
diplomacy.
hurt each other. Yeah. You know, it's let's just not fight over it or argue over it or hurt each other over it. But then you introduce land boundaries and money and things like that, and things go wrong. Yeah. That's
Correct.
what Kenya was really interesting because I would talk to different people and walk away going, wow, I got to wrap my head around how they think because what they thought was okay was so foreign to anything I would have thought they would think was okay. Because what I think is okay is different than what they think is okay. And I'm sure it's, as time goes on, I'm talking, years ago, it maybe has changed, maybe not. I don't really know
And what's
until you
right?
really,
What is it?
yeah.
What's right? Is Americanizing? I mean, when you think about Afghanistan, are we in a weird way colonizing too?
Well, there's customs there, especially when you're talking about women and the young girls and how they're made to marry older guys and all their traditions. And
Mm.
yet, um, the young girls were excited about it because it was presented to them as an honor.
Mm.
Now, from my standpoint, I'm like, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah.
So
Right.
it's just it mind-boggling. So, and then I can see how wars would start because we would think as a Western culture, this is cruel, this is wrong, they're underage, they shouldn't be going through this. And they're all like excited and happy about it. Not all of them, but most of them, because they
And there
were
are
taught
things that
to
are not
be.
humanely good, honestly.
Yeah. So it's just, I can
So I
see
can
why
only,
wars start.
Afghanistan and just going in, and
Yeah.
I can also understand people wanting to help. I mean, isn't that part of it too? Just wanting to help, thinking, just being there that help rebuild, be safe, but it's got to be different going in. Like the African countries is more colonial and everything, and I mean Asia is colonized. I mean Mexico's South everywhere's been colonized in some way, right? But it's interesting going in
Mm.
during a fighting part of things and then sitting there and helping to redevelop. Would you say it is kind of colonizing in a way, or no?
Well, no, I won't say that we had any colonial
Yeah.
ambitions in Afghanistan.
Mm-mm.
I mean, really, it was just we went in there, and the prevailing notion at the time was that if we could build a stable democracy, it would prevent the conditions that allowed Al Qaeda and the Taliban to
Mm.
flourish. And we thought that
Yeah.
if we could do that, then it would negate the possibility of us ever having to go back there again. I'll
Mm.
say this, and I know it's probably not a particularly popular point of view, but I think how you ultimately win these wars and how you prevent the conditions that would precipitate going back there again
Mm.
is that you enter, you fight, you trash, and you make the enemy feel defeated to the point where he gives up, and you make it very clear to him before you leave that said, okay, you did this that made me come over here the first time. Don't even think about making trouble for me again, or we're going to do this whole thing all over again.
Yeah.
Rinse, wash, repeat.
Yeah.
And, and 9 times out of 10, I mean, history bears that out, that, hey, that is enough to establish the lasting peace. You go over there, you make the enemy feel defeated, and you leave some type of cyclic reminder that says, hey, don't get the bright idea to make trouble for me again, or we're going to come back.
Well, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, if when I got
That
into
makes
trouble,
sense.
Nancy
Actually
said,
makes
you've got
sense.
3 things, I'll give you 3 chances. If you do this again, you're going to get in trouble. I swear to God, I tested every single time and I got in trouble.
Yeah.
And if she didn't enforce
I
when she
had
said,
to.
I'm going to enforce,
Yeah,
then where would
Mhm.
she be as a parent? You
right.
know what I mean? You can't
No,
be.
it's sometimes
I'm
I'm
not
so
saying
mad at her
parenting and
for
military is the same, but in a
pushing
way
me.
it is. It's like you've
No,
got
but
to
Right.
follow
if you
up on what you
don't,
say,
if you don't, then you lose.
Yeah.
You have to.
For
And
many
when
years. For many
yeah,
years.
and she pushed and pushed and I pushed. I kept saying, you know what,
And I
you
still
got one
will.
more chance. And then she'd do it. I'm like, oh gosh, darn, she put me in that situation where I had to do what I told her I was going to do.
She didn't do anything
And a
bad, but she
lot of
did chase
times
me
it
around
hurt.
with a frying pan once in the garden. It was perfect for everyone. It's like, no,
That
I
was
told you.
funny.
And she
That was
chased me
more
and I
fun.
told her I would run and I did. So it was a good
Yeah.
workout. But I think
Yeah.
I agree with you. And it's, and I think the Afghanistan, it sounds right to do. It sounds like a good idea, but let's go into, so there are different cultures, so it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
I think it's sad how things have transpired this year, or I should say 2021, and how, I just think it was a little bit of not a little bit, a hot mess. And sad. I mean, these are people's lives on
Right.
all levels,
Mhm.
everyone can, in the contractors. That's something we never talk about, is the contractors that are involved also get hurt,
Correct.
and their families.
Mhm.
That's something too. And we saw that with
Yeah.
Afghanistan, that they got, kind of shafted in a way, coming back. But with Hawaii, you have these tanks, and I know we want to touch on Foxbat Tales.
Okay.
You got the MiGs, the MiG-25s.
Correct.
So this brings in my Russian. See, I'm very fascinated. You know what? I'm going to line up all your books one day and go, okay. I feel like next time we talk, we need to have a globe here, like in a timeline, you know,
Sure.
because
That'd
it
be
just
cool.
seems like how, and I know we've brought this up on shows, how are, okay, so it's armor for the ground, aircraft for the air, obviously, but how are we having, not just us, but how are like aircraft going from to the enemy and to how are everyone's selling each other their aircraft and their armor? Like, it's like, why? I mean, I get it, there's money, but I mean,
Right.
it's like, don't you want to hold on to all your, like, I would be like a squirrel putting all my ammunition aside and never getting rid of it just in case the big one came.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it'll blow everybody up. You know, I'm just saying, I want all my stuff. I'm never going to give it to the enemy just for a few bucks. Hell no. I'm just saying, I'm keeping all my aircraft and my tanks, but I don't have any.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
sorry.
No, I was just going to say that, yeah, it's been a longstanding practice since the 20th century to have what's called FMS, foreign military sales. And what we do is we take any number of our allies out there and we say, okay, if we determine this person to be a reliable ally, then in the spirit of maintaining a good diplomatic relationship with this ally, we are going to sell them some of our home-built military equipment, and we will give this to them for the benefit of being able to defend their homeland, and also in a sense perpetuate the two-way traffic between our two countries, so that they not only have this American-built piece of equipment to defend their homeland, but they also employ a carousel of these American contractors, American service personnel, to help ensure the proficiency of that homegrown military, to effectively use this piece of machinery that we've sold to them. So, and it works very well in maintaining those ties of friendship. The only thing that you do in the sense of taking a gamble when you do that is you don't really know if that friendship is still going to be there in 5 years. You don't know if that friendship is still going to be there in 10 years. I think if we take a look at some of the allies that we've sold military equipment to, I think that we can count on the Israelis being a reliable ally, which is why we've given them the F-15, and that's why we've also sold them the F-16. I think that we can also rely. We can have a long-standing relationship with the British because we've not only given them equipment in the past, but they also sold us the rights to manufacture our own copy of the Harrier jet, which was based in Britain. But we've also made a few blunders in the sense that we gave the F-14 to Iran, and that was yes, and that was during the reign of the Shah. And this, of course, was back at the time when Iran was our closest ally in the Middle East. But fast forward just 5 or 6 years later, after we gave the initial batch of F-14s to Iran, well, surprise, surprise, you have the Ayatollah Khomeini take over, and they've now been a sworn enemy for the better part of like almost 50 years now. So it just you take a very big gamble when you do that.
So the MiG-25s, these were supposed to be heavy, like non-moving machines, basically. And tell us a little bit about them, because they're Russian, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or Soviet, I should say.
It was really designed to do one thing. It was designed to be very, very fast. It was not suited at all to be a dogfighter. And the Russians, initially, they kept a very close hold on the aircraft. For the first few years of its existence, it was lent very sparsely to the countries that the Soviets deemed to be allies. And its first big operational debut was in the Middle East in the early 70s, in particular the Yom Kippur War. But the Soviets, when they deployed their MiG-25 units to the Middle East, to Egypt specifically, they said, okay, we're going to let you guys use these for your benefit, but you are not getting operational control of any of them. They said, they're going to be under Soviet control. They're going to be flown by Soviet pilots, and you are never going to see are never going to see an Egyptian pilot strapped into the cockpit of one of these, because, even though we're helping you out, by God, this is our plane. We're going to decide what we do with it, and we're going to decide how it's going to be used. And it wasn't until, a few years after the Yom Kippur War that, the Soviets finally started to, when they started to relax a lot of their regulations on the plane and say, okay, well, we can expand the expand the parameters of our export industry.
Wow. So I agree with them on that, though, about the very beginning going, if we're going to help you, we're running our own plane. It's like, I'm not going to give my car to somebody who's going to go race
drive.
it. If, if anyone's going to race my car, it's me, and I will win. But
hello.
I'm just saying, but no. But so this is where this plane, how does it end up in Afghanistan?
All righty. So if we wind the clocks back to December of 1979, you had the rise of the communist government in Afghanistan, and it was in the wake of that communist revolution that you also had the rise of the Mujahideen. And what happened was that in the latter part of 1979, the communist Afghan government was having trouble fighting its own counterinsurgency against the Mujahideen, against all the various, anti-communist factions that were, trying to counter the communist government there. That they asked the Soviets for help. And, of course, because it's a communist enclave that is right on the southern border of the Soviet Union, they were more than happy to send military assistance there. So the Soviet invasion, as it is, happens in December of 1979. And it was during that inaugural year of the conflict, 1979-1980, that you see the first MiG-25 deployments there. And its operational use within Afghanistan was within the realm of it being a reconnaissance jet, because the Afghan, both the Afghan Air Force and of course the Mujahideen, they didn't really have the capability to conduct a protracted air war there. So what did you have all of our top-notch interceptors and fighters doing? You had them many times either performing ground attack missions, or in the case of the MiG-25, performing these high-level reconnaissance missions. And that is what the MiG-25 did for its brief tour of duty in Afghanistan.
Wow. And
in that capacity, it proved to be incredibly effective. But the pilots who came back from that deployment said, it was weird, it was surreal doing all these photographic reconnaissance missions over the Afghan countryside, because if you look down there, you can see that there is not a single human being for miles. And if heaven forbid I had to ditch out of my plane for any reason at all, by God, I would not want to bail out over this godforsaken country.
Wow.
Because, who knows if anyone would ever find me again.
Wow. So, but at the same time, you still had tanks there too, right?
Correct.
Eventually, yeah. So this air and ground. When things like, okay, the MiG's going over there, tanks. I know Nancy wanted to talk about the island hopping.
Yeah, I
of
want
tanks,
to know.
but
I want to know how the tanks get there.
How do you move? Like, how do you move all of this
tank
armor and aircraft and tanks and all of this stuff to places that you're going to use, right? Without the enemy knowing hey, they're moving in, let's get them and let's count what they've got and see what they've got. Like, don't you
Yeah,
Right.
I
kind of have
mean-
to be under, you have to be sneak attack.
Well,
Back to
yeah,
sneak
No, but I
attack.
mean,
well,
you can't, can you move a tank? I mean, you have to move it by water, right? Or by road, not in the air. Can you put it, you can't put a
Whoa.
tank in an airplane at all,
well,
can you?
well,
Uh-oh.
see, here's the thing. You know, when you are making an armored assault into any type of territory, there's really no way that you can, there is really no way that you can do it secretively. You know, you know, any type of mechanized force is going to make a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And you know, in the case of Afghanistan, when you had the Soviet army entering that country, it was easy for them to do because they already shared a border with Afghanistan. But
Mhm.
in the case of the American war effort,
Yeah.
what you would have to do is you would have to fly in a battalion of tanks, pretty much one tank at a time. Even the biggest cargo
Wow.
plane in our inventory, the C-5A Galaxy, it can only accommodate one M1 Abrams at a time. So you have
Wow.
these round trips being made by these cargo planes that are inserting these tanks into Afghanistan, you know, one or two at a time. And
Wow.
that is how you do it if you don't have a means to use any type of a land-based border. Now, when you're talking about getting a tank from one continent to another, you of course have to use a cargo ship, but there's usually a
Right.
point of entry that's very close to where you want it to be.
Right.
Wow.
Mm.
So what about when
I
you
was-
talk about,
So you can actually put a tank in a plane.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
so what about also when you talk about battleships, right? And I was looking at those battleships and we got doggies barking. They want to be
I
part
know.
of it.
Okay.
They're like,
Mhm.
dude, I want to go in there. They, you know, but when you look
They're
at
like-
battleships, so are they ever like cargo? Well, like what? I mean, what are they carrying on there? Because I was looking at those. Those are some serious structures. Like I feel like if
Right.
you I don't even want to be near them, man. Like
Okay.
could take you out.
Yeah.
They look like
Yeah.
barges that could just, you know, kill.
Right. Well, cargo ships and troop carrier ships are a little bit different of an animal than a battleship. You know, if you take a traditional dreadnought battleship, or even if you take a modern day cruiser or a destroyer, the only thing that it's carrying its crew, and it's also carrying all of the necessary ammunition for its armaments. And that's pretty much the only thing that you find aboard any of those ships. You know, of course, you will also find a handful of Marines on each one of those ships, you know, as part of what could be a quick reaction force. But yeah, largely those ships are really designed to do one thing. They're designed to either attack the shore, or attack an enemy ship, and most of what they're carrying on board is going to be dedicated to that end.
Wow. It's interesting. I mean, I know living out in 29 Palms, you'd see like big
All
Jeep
sorts of
things,
things.
tank things going on. I mean,
All
it was like a
sorts of things.
convoy. I mean, it's like,
Right.
you know, you wanted to go,
It's
like, we
like,
got us a
okay.
convoy. You know, they go. I mean, it is like you're saying, it is noise. It is, it's a
Mhm.
mass thing. And when I even
Mhm.
think about like how, you know, troops get in to fight, like even when they were going after Osama bin Laden and stuff, you know, it's like, how did that,
Mhm.
talk about sneak attack, right? They will
Right.
never
Yeah.
get past that saying now. It's our saying for
No,
everything
sneak
now.
attack.
It's a sneak attack thing. But, you
Yeah.
know, getting in there and like, you know, that was some crazy stuff to be able to pull that off. And
Mhm.
because don't they see you flying in? I mean, even if you're bringing troops in, it's like, how do you hide people coming into a country, you know? And
Yeah.
You really can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really done. I think the only way that you do that effectively is if you make it a coordinated air and ground attack, is if you have a preparatory strike and you soften up targets and you do a little bit of shock and awe, which puts the enemy on the defensive and puts them in a state of panic to where they're trying to process what's happening. Then that buys you some critical time, using the element of surprise to get across the border and try and set up positions.
Oh.
And, you know, and then you put the enemy in a state of panic to where they're trying to scramble to get a handle on what is now an invading force inside their country.
Wow.
Yeah, so you attack over here while you're flying stuff
Ambush.
in over there.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
yeah, so that
It's like
they're
when
like,
you almost
"Oh,
got your
busy
first speeding
here."
ticket, Nancy.
Yeah.
She got pulled over and the cop says to her, "Where's the fire, little lady?" And she said, "It's over there." And he took off.
It was so cool.
It's a
It was
true
the best thing ever. And I just sat there like, I didn't know
She
if
got
I
off.
was allowed to leave or not. And I waited and waited. And I went, okay, bye.
No, dude, get
Because
out.
he never
Go.
came back. I was like, cool.
But don't you
That's
think
pretty funny,
it's
actually.
changed over the years? When you think about talking about tanks in the Pacific and those big battleships to what we
Right.
have now. And I remember our interview with Gary Slaughter and some of the soldiers who were on the final mission for the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'll never forget that interview. I should send it to you. It was probably one of the most, I mean, I
Crazy.
can understand. I wish we knew you then, because it would have been cool to have you on the show.
Yeah.
All of them that here it is, Kennedy just made that call, like, okay, that's it, we're done. Here's these guys coming in, and you think about these Russian guys going through Cuba, and they're sweating inside the submarine. They're literally dying, but they're like that same
Yeah.
mindset of no matter what we're going through. Here's Gary and his guys out on this ship.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's all documented. There's in a documentary too. The guys come in on the other side and he goes, okay, we're done. I got, Kennedy said this, we're done. What can we give you as a peace offering? And all they wanted was bread and coffee and cigarettes.
Yeah.
So he went and goes, oh, I think we've got that in the kitchen. He goes to get it to him.
Yeah.
And then the photographer came overhead in a plane and dropped the fireworks, like these little things, these lights, so he could light up the sky and
Crazy.
take the photograph. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, it almost started
Crazy.
all over again,
Over
just in
again.
that moment because of that. I mean, it's just when you think about that's how we were operating to what we are now with lasers and all of this light and digital stuff. I mean, we're going to space now. It's like, where are we going? Do you think with all this space stuff, do you think our next step is the military going to space?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
I mean, we already have military satellites in the air. What was it, a few years back, we had the creation of the brand new Space Force. So yeah.
Would you
You're
go?
definitely on. What's that?
Well, but
Would you go?
Were I a younger man? Yes.
Oh, come on. You got to do
But
it.
no, I think you almost get forced into whether you want to go to space or not us personally going, but countries, in order to totally protect themselves, have to be where other countries go. So
Right.
if the Soviets are going to go to space or the Chinese are going to go to space, we got to go to space, whether we want to or not. So it's not really about, oh, let's go see what's on the moon and let's go check out the other planet. It's self-defense.
So
actually
10 years from
that's
now,
how I view it.
Mike's going to be going, I mean, your next segment with us will be Combat Diaries, right? We'll be doing that. So then 10 years from now, you'll be on our show and I don't know, we'll be all hologrammed somewhere. Who knows what's going to be happening? And you're going to be doing
going where no one has gone
Space
before.
Trooper Diaries. That's going to be your next 10 years from now.
Sure.
I bet you. Let's place bets.
Written from the lunar base.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Right. We'll all be floating around. Who knows what kind of cars we'll have. I mean, I don't, put anything past us on what's changing in the world, but always a good conversation. Military, Mike, I always learn things. I know I have some stupid questions in there, but I don't think they're stupid because you got to learn some way, right? But you remember all of these, you've got to it's about putting it in context of what was happening where and when, and it's
you
just
do a really good job.
Yeah, you do. You're a good
really
teacher, and
thank you.
and the books, we're just, each one, you get everyone's stories out and make it more
personal.
And you personalize it. And I think people really identify and can connect in a better way and understand history and what's happening now through reading your books. So very good stuff. Everyone, again, keep up with Military Mike at MikeGuardia.com. Again, his latest book is Danger Forward, The Forgotten Wars of General Paul F. Gorman. You can get it on Amazon, but good.
Really good.
MikeGuardia.com. And of
Thank
course,
you.
our shows air daily. Just go to bigblendradio.com. And of course, stay tuned for our first Monday shows with Military Mike. Take care, Mike. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you.
Thank you.